part.
Yeah, yes.
Like, you're in the distillery when you're trying that.
What I found very funny is that there actually are plastic.
Yeah. So
you would feel like, okay, they're cask sample.
Beautiful.
Let's put them in beautiful glass bottles.
Yeah,
Nope.
nice packaging design, obviously, with a new direction for the brand.
With the Dymo label printer labels on it, with just the permanent marker written on it.
Yeah, it's something special when it's as hideous as that. I had someone recently who said it reminded them a bit of a window cleaner.
Yes.
I was like, trust me, it tastes better than that. Not that I know of.
Sometimes we are sitting at home and doing Skype calls, and sometimes I get the opportunity to fly to a distillery. This actually is the first time we did an on-the-road special in a distillery in Ireland. And where is a better place to start than at Teeling in Dublin? And I'm joined with Chris. We've already spoken to each other, not face-to-face sadly enough, but during COVID we did it via Skype. And now I'm here and I'm planning on discussing with you what is the spirit of Dublin for the people who didn't see the last episode. Could you please introduce yourself? Like, what is your job? Because
absolutely, yeah. Well, I suppose first and foremost, it's great to see you, Max. It's great to have you here in Dublin in our actual distillery. It's a little bit different than obviously talking online, so it's yes. Amazing to have you here. Yeah, well, basically what I do for Teeling is I represent Teeling as their European brand ambassador. So typically my role is divided into predominantly brand advocacy and also brand education. Everything from yourself trade shows, tastings, masterclasses, guest shifts, cocktail workshops. It'll also involve a little bit of marketing. It sounds like a little bit of a cliche, but day to day is very different. Okay. You constantly have to be flexible. But the main thing is, promoting the brands and building brand awareness around many of our European markets, and also continue to educate people on Teeling whiskey and on Irish whiskey as a whole.
Is education a big thing? Do you feel like people can benefit from a lot more whiskey education?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, the Irish whiskey market is growing at such a steady rate. It's one of the fastest growing spirits categories in the world. And I think that only continues to grow with continued education. You just take one example, like the categories of Irish whiskey. You've got malt, grain, pot still, and blend, and even dividing those up and giving cohesive explanations of each of those styles can really help your average consumer to, feel informed and feel empowered and go out when they're at a bar in the Netherlands, or if it's anywhere around the world, or if they're in a retailer or in a supermarket and they see something on the shelf that they understand what they're looking for. Because I think that's the most important thing, knowing
what you're gonna buy.
Exactly, knowledge is power and all that. Yeah.
There's I've been sent here, and sadly enough, Lucia couldn't be joining us.
I wish to have you both here. But
she was really hoping to be here, but she gave me some homework because Lucia, she's like, okay, flavor is very important, sure. But there's one thing that she really finds maybe even more important. It's sustainability. So I got a big 12-page checklist which I need to walk through. No, but just joking aside, sustainability is something which I'm quite interested in, because that's something which is not very common with old distilleries since 1800.
Sure, very important, I think, in the modern drinks industry. Absolutely.
Is sustainability a big thing for Teeling, or do you think it's not that much?
No, it is, yeah, and it's something that is a big part of our operations. Maybe something that rests a little bit more in the background. You maybe won't hear us talking as much about it in terms of our brand discussions, but it's definitely there. From the minute you get in the distillery, we're constantly looking to reduce our waste using things like water, rain harvesting systems, and recycling our spent grain. But even kind of more fun side projects, like, for example, literally on the roofs of our distillery, we've got about 500,000 bees. So we cultivate our own honey. We use that as a sweetener in our drinks program. And it gives us an opportunity to kind of lean into the local community, to have these local outreaches, but at the same time keep on top of our sustainable efforts. I'd say, it's a huge part of how we operate.
And talking about the glass, where the whiskey is stored in the boxes, are those also recycled or recyclable?
Yeah, so at present our Teeling small batch, which is our flagship whiskey, now, as you know, available pretty much all around the world in 70 international markets. That is currently 70%
wow.
Fully recyclable, and the aim is that in the next couple of years we'll have our secondary packaging, which will be 100% recyclable. So, we're constantly taking these small steps. It's again, it's maybe a little bit of a cliche, but these things don't happen overnight. They're constant small efforts that lead to the overall goal of making us as sustainable as we possibly can. Whether we can be 100% sustainable as a distillery is always a challenge, particularly for an urban distillery, right, based in the city centre. But I think making those efforts is definitely a good starting point.
And if we're talking about the distillery itself, we had a quick walkthrough of the whole distillery, and basically
do you like it?
The visitor experience, which is very nice. But I got like the feeling that it's basically like it's built for visitors. Is that also the intent? Like, as soon as you come in, like, you can see every side of the distills, you can see everything, which I find the most very amusing is like the spirit safe is on this raise, like it's on eyesight, but it looks so in the middle of nowhere basically because of that. So I really love the distillery to visit, but is it built for visitors?
Yeah, I mean it's a good operation. I mean it's a good observation. It is something that I know was discussed in the opening of the distillery, of having it consumer friendly where people could come in and see every stage of the process, but at the same time having a fully functional distillery was very important, as Teeling was the first one in a really long time, in 125 years. We wanted to make sure that people could come in and get a sense of what it is to see Dublin whiskey and bringing whiskey back to the capital and having that authentic feel, as well as a full transparency from start to finish. And I think that has a great knock-on effect in terms of our brand messaging and how we can, almost inadvertently create brand advocates for these people like yourself that come to the distillery, that see it firsthand, and then go off and talk about it to other people. And I think that's so important in a brand home, is having it functioning.
What is, in your opinion, the difference between having a functional brand like Teeling and the distillery itself? Like, do you think that building a distillery around a brand is vital to a good product?
Yeah, I mean, just I suppose speaking from my own personal role, it's been very useful for having things like internal trainings and brand-led events. And definitely it kind of becomes the beacon for the brand, where you can have an opportunity to obviously bring people from any country around the world. And I think they'll get no better sense of how you operate than coming here. That's not to say that all the wonderful work that we do, around the world is not beneficial. Absolutely. And we've some fantastic distributors in many markets that distribute Teeling. But I think it's a very special opportunity if you ever do get a chance to come to Dublin. And having that, for a brand, me personally, I think is vital, as well as just from, I suppose, a side note, anybody like looking to get into the industry. I know that I've had plenty of conversations with people asking me, how do I get into the drinks industry? How do I start working for a distillery? How do I become a distiller? And these are questions that, like,
very common.
Yeah, very, very common. And I always say to people, you're one of the best places is a brand home, because you'll learn not only about sales and marketing, and you'll learn about the production process, but you'll also get these behind the scenes nuggets that you maybe never pick up if you're out in the field. A brand home is absolutely indispensable for, I think, gaining knowledge within the whiskey industry as well.
Talking about brand home, we got a small little
I almost forgot about it for a second there.
Whiskey. Yeah. To be honest, we recorded this episode way in advance of people at home being able to see them. So for the Dutch audience who has our podcast subscription, what actually is in your tube is, for us at this point, still a surprise. So
TBC,
we don't know. But there is by coincidence, because I didn't plan this out this way, we are in a very special week visiting here.
Indeed.
Because you got something to celebrate, you guys.
Yes, I suppose a small landmark for the brand. It's been a very exciting week. So we've just celebrated our 7th anniversary as a fully functional distillery.
Congratulations! I saw the balloons and the cupcakes downstairs.
I know, yeah, it's full celebrations here at Teeling. So no, it's great. And look, we're coming very close, obviously, to a big historical date, which will be 10 years.
Yeah.
In 2025, as a decade of Dublin distilling. It's incredibly exciting for someone who's worked with the brand since pretty much the very start. I've seen the change in the company and how much it's growing within that short period of time, and even just to see what's in our glass right now and what's available here in the distillery. We've such a changeover in stock in terms of we now have so many whiskies that are distilled in Dublin, 100%, based right in the city centre, that are in a variety of different styles, from malt to pot still to even our first triple distilled peated single malt like the Black Pits. And that's, very cool for people who want to learn about Irish whiskey, to try some of the whiskey, that was distilled in Dublin for the first time in nearly 50 years. It's a little bit of history in the bottle, whether you hate it or love it.
It's still a big moment. And this, what we currently are drinking, is a distillery exclusive.
This is, so this is actually our birthday bottling. So this is something that we started to do in the last couple of years. Again, it's a nice sort of tie with the local community where all the proceeds are going to go back to local charities here in Dublin. Okay. It's quite a small bottle run, so there's only 900 bottles.
Which is too small.
Maybe even gone by the time this episode comes out.
It's too small, Chris. It's way too small.
But yeah, it's a fantastic release. It's a vatting of both pot still single malt and peated single malt, something very interesting. Bottle of 47.7%, and this will be available now on our distillery online store, so it's kind of something specific here to the brand home.
And the cask types, what are used for this?
So for these, they're predominantly bourbon barrels, but at Teeling overall, as you know, we use pretty much everything.
Everything you can get your hands on.
Anything in existence, yeah. There's around now between 150 to 200 different expressions in our warehouse. So everything's, spanning from the traditional bourbon, port, sherry, to fortified wines and, dessert style wines. Even things like rum casks, beer, gin, aquavit, the list goes on and on. It makes the job very fun when you're working with this level of innovation and this number of cask types, and that's just maturation. That's not all the other stages.
This is one thing about maturation that I want to ask, just to be 100% sure. This spirit is 100% distilled here in Dublin at your facility, and this is 100% Dublin whiskey.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so it's, as I said, maybe it's the fact that I work for the brand and I'm from Dublin, but I'm a little bit biased, but it is exciting. So for anyone who's maybe not familiar with the Teeling story in a condensed version, we first operated in the 1980s. So the Teeling family, they basically bought an old ethanol plant on the border of Northern Ireland and Ireland in the 1980s. They sold that facility, so that it was the Cooley Distillery, not too far from Northern Ireland, in around 2010, 2011, and they sold off that distillery to a third party. Now, as part of that, they decided to keep a large proportion of casks to set up here in Dublin to build a brand home to sell commercial products since 2015, when we started, production here in Dublin. So if you do the maths, now we have whiskey that's, as I said, around 7 years old.
Mm-hmm. But that's why you guys were able to come on the market with how old was it? The first revival Teeling?
The revivals, were somewhere between 12 to 15 years old. And at the same time, we had our 21-year-old. Later, we did 24. So, this turned a lot of heads where this young, progressive, very trendy brand of Irish whiskey coming to whiskey shows with a 21-year-old single malt. We were a little bit bewildered and being like, how is this possible that you have a 33-year-old whiskey and you're only,
40 years old.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was always a kind of fun conversation to have. And I think it immediately brought them into the story of Teeling whiskey. Mm-hmm. So that's what we call our family reserve. We have a large proportion of that old stock that was distilled outside of Dublin. Okay. And then since then, within the 7 years that we've been operating as a brand, we've now distilled nearly 4 million litres from Dublin. So the good news is, products like the Teeling Black Pits or the pot still, which are available in Netherlands, there's going to be even more of that in the future. Products that have been made here and that have that sign of excellence from our great team here at Teeling.
What I want to briefly just chat about the series, because this is something which might be confusing for someone who doesn't work with Teeling all day. Sorry, Chris. You started with the Revival series.
Yes.
That's basically together with the small batch rum cask. Those were at the same time, roughly?
Yeah, so you're looking at give or take around the same time period. It was also the Trinity series.
Okay.
So the Trinity series was our small batch, our single grain, and our single malt. They were our 3 core products that were available at the time.
Okay.
So 3 very different styles. Each was kind of our best foot forward in each respective category of Irish whiskey.
Okay. And then we have the Revival series, which started off. What was the goal with this Revival series?
Yeah, so I mean, it was kind of twofold. The first was, I suppose, to celebrate the opening of the distillery in 2015 as a fully functional distillery in 125 years. So it was to celebrate that fact of I suppose, reviving the long-standing tradition of urban distillation here in Dublin. And we marked that with a new whiskey every couple of months, which was part of the Revival series, hence the name. But also, it was waiting for our first commercial release from Dublin, which was the single pot still. So it was kind of a step-by-step process with the single pot still, where we had a batch series. We reworked the recipe. We had a lot of discussions, with people like yourself in the industry, getting feedback and seeing what was the response essentially to that product. We changed it over time, so it changed in terms of mostly the maturation. We were quite happy with the mash bill. Was 50% malt and 50% unmalted barley. Obviously, that high unmalt component drives through a lot of that inherent spice, which can be really enjoyable if it's balanced well with the sugars. Say, for example, using something like a fortified wine, like sherry or port. And eventually, we sort of did a lot of testing, learned what we felt represented our spirit here in Dublin, with our 3 copper pot stills from Freely, our white wine yeast and the fermentation, just I suppose the style of our whiskey and what worked best.
The basis of all the expressions.
Exactly,
yeah.
and that eventually became what's commercially now available, which is both Oloroso sherry, virgin American oak, and some American bourbon barrels. So it's about 50% Oloroso sherry, 25 in terms of the percentage of casks. Yeah, something we're very proud of, but that's essentially where the Revival sort of was leading towards, that first celebratory release.
So we have the Revival series, which basically was the stepping stones for the pot still series.
And, don't get me wrong as well, a standalone exceptional series of Irish single malts that were moving away from those traditional flavours that we associate with Irish single malts. We'd everything from Calvados casks, rum was the first edition, Pinot de Charente, and again, sort of just turned people's heads and got them thinking more about the Irish whiskey industry.
What an Irish whiskey could be.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that sort of set the tone for what we were going to release as a brand in the future.
What was the next step after the pot still and the Revival?
So in terms of our core range then that was produced here in Dublin was the Black Pits.
Yeah.
Black Pits was something that I was so excited about when you could smell it coming into the distillery. It's a first triple distilled peated single malt from Dublin. It's matured in Sauternes wine casks as well as bourbon. So very different from your typical Islay peated single malt. I grew up on the likes of Lagavulin and Lefroy and Ardbeg and so on and so forth. But what's great about the Black Pits is the triple distillation means you keep a lot of the fruits, you keep those high esters, and the Sauternes drives through then this lovely sweetness as well as tannins. So you get not only that beautiful sort of burst of peat, but also that fruit expression that you expect from an Irish whiskey.
We also have something else, some beautiful bottles which I saw, the Renaissance. Renaissance?
Yeah, it's a beautiful bottle, isn't it?
It's way too good to open up, which I find a shame, because I'm constantly looking at the bottles and like, oh, they look so beautiful on my shelf. And then you try them and you're like, oh, it's way better in my glass. But what is the whole idea behind the Renaissance?
Yeah, so
I can figure out a lot by the name, but
sure. And I think obviously it's a similar elk to the Revival series. With the Renaissance, it's interesting in the sense that it's a slightly older age statement, so we're talking only 18-year-old single malts. And the idea with this completely new bottle design, obviously completely new vision for this series, was that we wanted to kind of mark the next chapter of Teeling whiskey. We'd passed our 5th anniversary. We'd managed to, I suppose, Eglise make an entry into the global whiskey industry as a new Irish whiskey brand, which, trust me, takes a very, very long time. And I suppose within 5 years, we were at that stage available in many markets around the world, and we wanted to celebrate that fact. The growth of Teeling whiskey, this next era, I suppose. So with the Renaissance series, again, there was 5 single malts. The first one was an absolute cracker. It was an 18-year-old in Madeira, probably one of my personal favorites. Second was Shiraz, so Australian Shiraz, red wine barrels, which again, very interesting, lovely tannins, a lot of that red fruit and a little bit of honeysuckle. 3 and 4 then there was similarities between the Revival and the Renaissance. So I think we kind of took learnings from that earlier series and sort of reapplied them. And that's something you'll see a lot of Teeling. I think we're not alone in this, but I think many distilleries, and Teeling included, kind of see the whiskey process as almost like a learning process. So the more that you inform yourself, the more cask types you use, the different tests you do in the distillery, be that on fermentation or even mashing and milling, it allows us to constantly get better and evolve in what we do. So the 3 and 4 of the Renaissance series were Muscat and Pinot de Charente. And then we finished strong on the final one, which has now just come out actually in all across Europe, our Renaissance 18 in Calvados, which is the 5th and final edition of the series. So that's now no longer in production. It's finished, done and dusted.
This is so impressive because there are a lot of many series, like also the Brabazon series is something which we can talk hours.
One of my favorites.
But then what I find most interesting is like the small batch collaborations, because I find we talked about this when we were downstairs in the visitor center. You have a beautiful cabinet of the bottles and explaining exactly what the idea is behind these series. But the way you guys use those small batch collaborations, I feel like more to educate yourself and people drinking them. When I'm not mistaken, the basis of all those whiskeys is exactly the same spirit.
Exactly. Yeah.
So no matter which, if it's the wine casks or the beer cask or whatever, it's all the same basic.
Yeah. So it's essentially our pre-rum premium blend from the small batch. So we're talking about 3 parts grain, 1 part barley, firstly aged for approximately about 6 years in American bourbon barrels before it's transferred into these secondary finishing casks, all extremely atypical. Probably, I think I said it to you downstairs, probably one of my favorite series of Teeling. Just that spirit of collaboration between companies and learning about their products and learning about how they operate, for me, is equally as interesting as, constantly having to be on my toes with the new releases from Teeling. But with the small batch collaborations, the idea is that, first and foremost, we want to expand the flavor repertoire within Irish whiskey. We want to challenge consumers' perceptions on how they think about Irish whiskey. Not only how they think about Irish whiskey, but how they talk and converse about Irish whiskey. And we want to, I suppose, challenge that and continue to grow the category. The other thing then as well is kind of comes back to this idea of constantly learning. So, if we use an aquavit cask or if we use like a pineapple rum cask, we've never done it before. And by extension, there's very few in the Irish whiskey industry that will have done it. So it allows us in future that if we have another style, be that single malt or pot still or grain or whatever that might be, we have a better understanding of how that works.
So, for example, I can say I'll buy 4 or 5 of these small batch releases, and I can exactly taste the difference between those pineapple rum cask.
Oh, completely different. Yeah, and it's so interesting as well, the fact that the small batches are controlled spirit, but yet the final products are entirely different. Okay. We've now done about, I'd say, somewhere in the realm of 15 to 20 of these collaborations, working with breweries and wineries and distilleries. And one of the most recent ones has been with Plantation, and we've used some of their pineapple rum casks. So they released a pineapple rum which was matured in our Black Pits peated single malt, so like a smoky pineapple rum. Absolutely, yeah. Okay, cool. Mind-blowing. Definitely. And then we released, I suppose, the reverse minus the peat. So we have our premium small batch blend, which has been aged in their pineapple rum casks for about 15 months. Not only that, bottled at 49.2% ABV.
Nice, okay.
So, with Teeling, any of our releases all minimum of 46%. Again, that was one of our aims of, I suppose, looking to elevate the image of Irish whiskey, slightly higher ABV bottlings. And the 49.2 just helps carry through the flavors so much. Like it's a lot more complex than just pineapple. You know, there's these lovely citrus and sugar notes, and also a hell of a spice in the finish, which rounds it off so nicely.
If you say like this increase from 46 to 49 is it's 3% of alcohol, which sounds like nothing, to be honest. But it does help a lot with the flavors. But why don't you bottle at cask strength?
So yeah, and again, these are things that all come down to taste. It's something that we felt worked best at this particular ABV. It's something actually that I got a chance to see firsthand a little bit just by coincidence. During the pandemic, we were obviously doing some great virtual activations online, and we got to produce, a lot of sample kits, which was great to connect with the consumer. And I got a chance to get a lot of our bulk liquid into the distillery and to dilute it, bringing it down to 46% ABV. And this was actually really kind of an educational experience, because I got to taste a little bit, as I was going along and seeing, okay, well, like, what is this is just an example, it's not something that we did, but an example of small batch at 47 or 48 or 46, and, the pineapple rum. And you said it yourself, 3% or, 3.2%, even 4% doesn't seem like a massive difference, but trust me, you'll taste it. There's such a difference. The reaction between water and ethanol and water and the final product can change vastly. And the 49.2%, I think that's really just what worked best in terms of the taste.
We talked about the spirit in the bottle itself. But there's one thing and one reason particularly that I wanted to come over to Dublin. And luckily I had yesterday the whole evening to walk around Temple and Liberties and stuff. On every bottle of Teeling, you guys write down the spirit of Dublin.
Yeah, true.
Which I felt like I wanted to better understand this quote. I wanted to understand like Dublin. I can't take everyone here to Dublin. I highly recommend, but I can't. Could you describe Dublin as for people who never visited?
Yeah, I mean that's a difficult question, but I think with how we perceive anyway the spirit of Dublin is, first and foremost looking, as I said earlier, to restart or revive that tradition of distilling in Dublin. Let's not forget, back in history, Dublin was one of the focal points, if not the epicenter for Irish whiskey. For example, in the 19th century, it housed 37 fully functional distilleries. You can imagine what Dublin must have been like, with that number of facilities, but also some of the most prominent, some of the largest distilleries in the world were based out of here, and the quality of the spirit produced in Dublin was, arguably seen as one of the best around the globe. So our aim with the spirit of Dublin is recapturing that, bringing Irish whiskey back as a top shelf product and bringing whiskey back to Dublin, this city that has so much provenance and so much heritage and so much stories when it comes to whiskey production. That's what we want to try and recapture, and at the same time leaning into the community and trying to capture what it means to be a Dublin distillery, that kind of leans into our charity outreach and the community programs that we're doing. But I think for anybody who's never been to Dublin as a whole, like the first thing that you'll notice is the size of the city. Getting around is quite easy. You can go, as you probably see.
It's not a huge city.
No, you can get around by foot quite easily, and there's plenty. It's very vibrant and it's constantly changing. Like you look at this area here, the Liberties where Teeling is based. Even in the last 5 or 6 years, how much change this area has seen, from new student accommodations to cafes and great bars in the city, and at the same time you'll get this really traditional feel. Like the red brick buildings in this area, and as we were talking about, the old Dutch Billy style architecture that at the same time constantly has this kind of clash between the old and the new, which I think is very interesting, and it's something that we try to capture even in our logo, the distillery, the phoenix and the pot still. That's that kind of juxtaposition between the old and the new, and that's how we produce our whiskey. But again, I think it kind of, in a way, speaks volumes for how Dublin is changing.
And do you feel like it's a youthful city, Dublin? Are there many younger, like, is there a younger generation coming to Dublin to live and work here?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's very multicultural as well. You'll see lots of different nationalities here, and by extension, there's great micro communities. And the thing is, as well, is coming over to Dublin, you've got some historical landmarks that you can see very easily, like Trinity College and Dublin Castle and the two beautiful cathedrals, St. Patrick's Cathedral and Christ Church. But then at the same time, you've got the wonderful nightlife in the city centre, and maybe not the same transport system as the Dutch, but I think we make up for that with the people. And yeah, if you've never been, it's definitely worth a visit. Particularly, a bit of a shameless plug. It's worth coming into Teeling Whisky and seeing what we're all about.
I think that there are many things that we can talk about, but experiencing it firsthand is definitely the best way to do so. We discussed about the 7-year-old, like the 7th anniversary. Last time you teased me with a new wine, small batch that was coming out, which you wouldn't tell on camera. This time I'm way closer, so you can't hide secrets now from me anymore.
The wine, I'm trying to remember what that must have been. Do you know what I think that must have been? The Recioto.
Yeah,
the Recioto wine cask. You're right. I'm surprised that you remember that actually. Yeah, even
no, I won't forget those.
You've been holding that for a while.
No.
So so that's part of the Teeling Sommelier Selection series, a fantastic series that really leans into some of the very interesting wine cultures all around the world. And the aim is that we're looking at different regions and I suppose inadvertently making a bit of a comparison between the terroir and between the styles. So we started first with France. Originally, actually, this was a French exclusive, so it was not available at the time in Holland, although I think like everything, it slowly made its way over.
Definitely.
Somehow or another. But the first edition was the Teeling Margaux. We then used some Sauterne, so some dessert wine from the south of France. Then Amarone, and then the fourth edition was the Recioto, which it's a great release. Again, 46% ABV. The wine itself obviously is a more dessert style wine, but me personally, it's a style of whiskey that I love to drink before dinner. So, for example, for an aperitif, things like cheese and meats and all that wonderful stuff, it works very well with food pairings in particular. Okay. That's my personal preference. So it has, again, these lovely red fruits on the nose, little bit of like caramel, and then definitely that leather spice that creeps through on the finish, but very, very accessible whiskey.
But what is coming up?
What is coming up? That's a good question. Yeah, it's probably the one that we get asked the most as a brand that's innovating so much. I think that the big one to look out for, obviously, that's now hitting shelves in the Netherlands is the Teeling Plantation collaboration, which is a very, very exciting release. And then, beyond that, we're still talking to our NPD, but you will probably see some fantastic vintage single malts in the future. You'll probably most likely see more of the collaborations. Hopefully, this is just my own personal aspirations. I'd love to see more of the grain. The Teeling 13-year-old was fantastic. I'd love to see a subsequent release for that, which was Bordeaux red wine casks, and it was 49.5%, I want to say. Yeah, it was stunning. Okay. But I'd love to see more grain whiskey from Teeling in particular. I think would be very interesting. So usually you'll start to see a lot more the new releases around September.
Okay.
That's kind of when you'll good. I suppose a good point to look out for any of the new Teeling products.
You've been. I imagine that you often visit the warehouse and be able to see all the different cask types and stuff like that. Is there some particular cask would caught your eye?
Yeah, there's a few. There's definitely a few. I'd say, anytime you go up to the warehouse, it's very special. I think you really get a more holistic understanding of how we operate. Unfortunately, it's not open to the public, but we do sometimes bring private groups up there. And some of my personal favorites, one would definitely have to be the Teeling Amberana.
Okay.
So the Amburana cask, it's a Brazilian hardwood, typically used in rum and cachaça production. Super unusual within the Irish whiskey industry, and it brings these very unique flavors. Everything from like carrot cake to a lot of raisins. So kind of has some of those, I suppose, typical sherry notes, like the red fruits and the spice. But yes, so unusual. You know, there's nothing that you taste that will in any way resemble it. Even, you know, I mentioned sherry, but it's still very, very different. I'm also a big fan. We've got some Japanese oak up there as well, some Mizunara, which has been great to see how that's progressed. And I'd say some of my all-time favorite as well has definitely been trying some of our core range. You know, trying it at cask strength, or trying it, you know, when it comes straight, when you're debunking the casks.
I want to zoom out one final time before I fly back home, about the history of the area we're in, because we are in the Liberties, which is a very interesting place.
Yeah, right. It's very it's very, very interesting. Like an area that originally was outside of Dublin.
Yeah.
So very little jurisdiction. People could essentially do whatever they liked, you know, within reason. And that's where the name comes from. The people were at liberty to do whatever they liked. You'd the right to set up your own marketplace. So that's why actually you'll see a lot of addresses in Dublin are named after marketplaces. Like Teeling, for example, is based in the Liberties, but more specifically, we're based in Newmarket Square.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, this would have been a very important area for like tradesmen bringing everything from like copper and iron and steel, to farmers bringing raw materials like corn and barley and rye and oats and all that stuff. And again, you know, these are things which would have been integral to the alcohol industry, which we don't maybe necessarily think of. And at the same time then in the Liberties, they had very little tax. So setting up industries would have been
way better.
Yeah,
than doing it
much
in
more easier. Much easier to set up, much more, I suppose, beneficial to the individual. And as a result, that's why you see, among many other reasons, you see 37 fully functional distilleries. Legal distilleries, I might add. So we're not even counting the illegal ones. 37 licensed distilleries in Dublin by the 19th century.
Oh, wow. And this formed a triangle?
Yeah, it's. I suppose it's often referred to as the Golden Triangle, and this would have been the large concentration of distilleries within the Liberties within Dublin. So you're talking around the 8th district. In Dublin, you'll see we very seldom refer to areas as districts, you know, as you might see in other countries. But it's not too far from, I suppose, the city centre. You're looking at about 15-20 minutes. And within this area, you're very close to a lot of water sources like the Grand Canal Basin, which leads out to the Irish Sea. So again, you know, these would have been water sources for breweries and distilleries. You have the local marketplaces where you can receive your local materials. You then would have had coopers and you know, places where you could reuse and sell and buy barrels. And I suppose Dublin, in a way, you know, particularly in this area, would have been a hub of energy, and would have been, you know, very vibrant as it is now. But I think the Liberties is an area that we were particularly interested in, not just because of the history, but also because of family ties. So you'll notice on any of our old bottlings for Teeling, it says 1782 written on the bottle. And the reason for that is they've actually ancestors, the current family, the current generation, they have ancestor roots that date back as far as 1782. A man called Walter Teeling basically had a small, I suppose the equivalent of a craft distillery nowadays in this area in Dublin. And once we found that out, we knew that was, you know, what sealed the deal to look at this area in particular, because we did look at other areas.
Okay.
But and this
was coming home. Basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Chris. I think that we talked about everything about Teeling, which we can do in a podcast or in a video. Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone to come and visit the distillery, get a tour, give you a quick message on
Absolutely.
Instagram.
Feel free to reach out to me, and that's very nice of you to say. Yeah, reach out to me in any social media, email. Maybe just not in the early hours of the morning.
we don't want to get you waking up every 4 a.m. Just by questions
No.
about.
I'm only joking, but yeah, I'm always available if you're looking to visit our distillery or if you want to know more about the brand. Absolutely.
I highly recommend it. It was a lovely seeing it, lovely touring, and we going back to the tasting rooms just to try some different things. And I want to thank you all for watching this episode. If you watch this on YouTube, please subscribe and give it a like. If you listen to the podcast, just leave a follow. It helps us a lot. Also follow Chris on and of course the Teeling community on Facebook.
Yes,
which
the
is a very lively,
Teeling Tribe.
Teeling Tribe, which is a very lively hub of Teeling information, to say the least. So please check out those links. Links will be also in the description. And I'll be here hopefully soon to grab a drink with you again, because this definitely isn't the last time we will be visiting the Liberties.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you, and have a nice day.